In the summer of 1944, across the bocage fields of Normandy, American Sherman tanks faced off directly against Nazi Germany's Panthers and Tigers. From years of experience, German tank crews believed the Sherman was an easy target. A single well-placed armor-piercing shot would ignite the vehicle, killing the entire crew within seconds. This belief was not mere illusion. It was based on reality, observed from North Africa, the Italian front, and even the Russian battlefield, where the Germans had seen countless Shermans engulfed in flames after rounds hit their ammunition storage. However, by mid-1944, a quiet change emerged, one that would render the Germans' entire tactical assumptions obsolete. That change was the Wet-Stowage system, liquid-protected ammunition storage quietly mass-produced by the Americans. To understand the importance of this innovation, one must go back a year earlier, to the disaster at Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, in February 1943. When American forces first confronted the experienced armored units of the Afrika Korps and German panzer divisions, the result was a devastating defeat. Across the broad valley, hundreds of American Shermans and Stuarts lay as charred steel wrecks. Statistics show that out of 300 American tanks, 183 were destroyed, most igniting fiercely after a single armor-piercing hit. Early reports blamed the gasoline engine's flammability, but after careful investigation, American ordnance engineers concluded that the primary cause was the propellant. In the Sherman's fighting compartment, over 70 rounds were loosely stowed along the hull and sponsons, without special protection. When the armor was penetrated, glowing metal fragments easily ignited the ammo, turning the tank into a towering inferno. The numbers were staggering. British studies indicated that roughly 65% of Shermans destroyed caught fire, while American data reported even higher, up to 80% in certain battles. For the crews, survival chances were near zero. The term Ronson lighter, after the Ronson brand lighter, became a sarcastic nickname used by both German and Allied soldiers, implying the Sherman always lights on the first try. Under such circumstances, the U.S. Army had to find a solution. Completely redesigning the Sherman was impossible in a short time, as America needed to maintain mass production for multiple fronts. Changing armor or engines was impractical. The solution had to be simple, effective, and implementable on the production line. The breakthrough idea arose during a tank committee meeting in late 1943, when a DuPont chemical engineer suggested, if you can't prevent the armor from being penetrated, why not prevent the ammunition inside from igniting by immersing it in liquid? At first, the idea sounded strange, even absurd. Some officers imagined the fighting compartment turning into a land submarine full of water. But after many rounds of testing, the concept evolved into a dual-layer ammunition storage system. Each ammo rack had double walls, with the space between filled with fire-retardant liquid. When a projectile penetrated, the solution would immediately flow over the propellant, preventing the fire from spreading. Instead of the entire magazine exploding, only a few rounds might ignite briefly and then extinguish. Initially, plain water was used, but this caused problems. Freezing in winter, corrosion of brass shells, and even bacterial growth in stagnant water. The second attempt added ethylene glycol as antifreeze, but it accelerated metal corrosion. Finally, the perfect formula emerged: Amudamp, a mixture of ethyl sodium potassium phosphate with rust inhibitors and antibacterial additives. This solution did not freeze even at 40 degrees C, protected the metal, and enhanced fire suppression. Tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground proved its undeniable superiority. Firing captured German 75mm and 88mm shells. Unprotected ammo racks exploded 73% of the time, but with wet stowage, this dropped to just 15%. Footage of these tests, declassified only in 1963, showed the difference vividly. With the old system, the fighting compartment erupted in towering flames. With wet stowage, only thin smoke escaped before quickly dying out. By January 1944, American factories began producing the new W Shermans, short for wet. Variants like the M4A176W and M4A375W followed. This upgrade required significant production adjustments. The floor was redesigned to house the underfloor ammunition racks, and electrical, hydraulic, and turret rotation systems had to be modified. Yet, thanks to industrial capacity, factories like Fisher Tank Arsenal and Pressed Steel Car Company maintained production of thousands per month. Crucially, this change did not alter the Sherman's external appearance. From the outside, German crews could not tell which Shermans were old, flammable models and which were new wet-stowage versions. This created a deadly blind spot for German intelligence. In July 1944, during Operation Cobra, wet-stowage Shermans first entered combat in France. The familiar German scenario, shooting the Sherman's side and waiting for it to erupt in flames, did not occur. Many tanks continued to rotate turrets and return fire, and even those disabled could often be recovered for repair. Post-war reports show that in Normandy, 67% of Shermans could be repaired and returned to action, while older models often burned to a total loss. The effectiveness became even clearer in subsequent battles. At Mortain, August 1944, the Germans launched a counterattack with 4 panzer divisions, assuming the American Shermans were severely weakened. But they had underestimated their enemy. Many Shermans they thought destroyed were merely temporarily out of action and quickly returned. At Arracourt, September 1944, the numbers were even more striking. Of 151 Shermans knocked out, only 41 were completely destroyed, while 110 were repaired within a week. German intelligence still reported all 151 as destroyed, creating serious miscalculations in their force assessments. This intelligence failure had deep roots. Most German studies of the Sherman were based on tanks captured in Tunisia and Italy in 1942-43, before wet-stowage existed. Detailed reports on ammo rack positions and hull weaknesses were widely circulated through training schools and anti-tank units. German officers were taught that a shot to the sponson would guarantee a Sherman explosion. This training habit was so ingrained that when reality changed, they still believed they had missed the ammo racks rather than suspecting the Americans had innovated. Throughout 1944 and the first half of 1945, no German intelligence documents recognized the existence of wet-stowage. Diaries and memoirs of aces like Otto Carius or Ernst Barkmann, which detailed numerous Sherman engagements, made no mention of tanks burning less than expected. Even when intact Shermans were captured, the Germans put them into service without understanding the significance of the liquid-filled ammo racks. German intelligence apparatus had weakened. With experts reassigned to other wonder weapon projects, overlooking what may have been the most important armored innovation on the battlefield. For the Americans, wet-stowage not only saved thousands of tank crews, but created an invisible strategic advantage. A Sherman battalion hit by 30 armor-piercing rounds might lose 20 tanks to fire in the old version, but with wet-stowage, only 3 to 5 were truly destroyed, the rest repairable. This meant American forces retained offensive power longer, sustaining campaign momentum and disrupting enemy calculations. From January 1944 to the war's end, tens of thousands of wet-stowage Shermans rolled across Europe. They participated in every major campaign, from Cobra to the Ardennes counteroffensive, from Arracourt to the crossing of the Rhine. Throughout, the Germans never realized their opponent had fundamentally changed since 1943. This ignorance, combined with American industrial might, helped shorten the war. In truth, wet-stowage was not a miracle innovation like the German 88mm gun or Me-262 jet engine. It was a simple preventive engineering solution. Yet its simplicity and mass producibility made all the difference. While Germany pursued superweapons requiring years to develop, the U.S. implemented a small, immediately effective change that altered the battlefield's dynamics. After their initial success in Operation Cobra in late July 1944, the Sherman M4A1, 76W, and M4A3, 75W continued to prove their value on the European battlefield. When German units, primarily panzer divisions, faced American tanks equipped with wet-stowage, they still relied on old tactics, aiming at the side sponson ammo racks to ensure complete destruction of the Sherman. In reality, many Shermans hit by rounds continued to maneuver, rotate their turrets and return fire, or, if temporarily disabled, were recovered and repaired within days. This surprise quickly threw the Germans into confusion, as their loss calculations based on the burn rates of older Shermans became completely unreliable. In August 1944, during the German counteroffensive Operation Lutic at Mortagne, intended to cut off the U.S. spearhead advancing from Avranches, they assumed that American Sherman forces had been severely weakened. The battlefield reality was the opposite. Wet-Stowage Sherman battalions, despite taking numerous armor-piercing hits from Panthers and Panzer IV, maintained stable combat effectiveness. Tanks that were damaged did not burn out immediately, allowing repair teams to quickly tow them from the front, replace tracks, refuel, and return them to the fight. U.S. reports indicated that 67% of Shermans hit during Operations Cobra and Arracourt were repaired and returned to combat, a figure that completely surprised German officers. At the Battle of Arracourt, 22 September 1944, the effect became even more pronounced. This decisive battle in Lorraine pitted German panzer divisions against the U.S. 4th Armored Corps. German soldiers had been confident in their ability to destroy Shermans by hitting the sponson ammo racks. But Wet-Stowage Shermans demonstrated remarkable survivability. Of 151 Shermans hit, only 41 were completely destroyed, while 110 were repaired within a week and returned to combat. This shattered German tactical models and force predictions, allowing American units to maintain offensive momentum while the enemy expended significant resources ineffectively. Beyond individual battles, Wet-Stowage altered perceptions of the Americans' sustained combat capability. While Germany relied on outdated reports of Sherman's flammability to plan counterattacks, they failed to realize that many tanks they believed destroyed were rapidly returned to action. U.S. tank battalions maintained continuous offensive power, sustaining pressure and expanding campaign corridors from Normandy into Brittany, then through northern France and Luxembourg. By the winter of 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Wet-Stowage Shermans continued to prove their worth. The U.S. 3rd Armored Division, led by Major General Maurice Rose, spearheaded attacks with M4A3E8 Easy 8 Shermans, a Wet-Stowage variant upgraded with a new turret, improved suspension, and a more powerful 76mm gun. Despite facing fierce Tiger and Panther assaults, damaged Shermans did not necessarily mean total loss. Frontline repair teams could recover and restore most tanks within days, keeping armored forces operational and enabling sustained strategic pressure and effective counterattacks. A notable example was the 761st Tank Battalion, nicknamed the Black Panthers, an African-American unit. Over 183 consecutive days of combat, they recorded numerous Shermans hit without detonating. Sergeant Reuben Rivers, posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, survived a battle in the Ardennes where his Sherman took 2 hull-penetrating hits, yet the ammo did not ignite. Thanks to Wet-Stowage, Rivers and his crew survived and continued fighting, directly demonstrating the superior survivability of these new Shermans. Alongside tactical impact, Wet-Stowage created an invisible strategic advantage. The Germans were completely unaware of this innovation. They continued to rely on intelligence reports based on older Shermans, and even when capturing some intact tanks, German technical experts failed to recognize the importance of the liquid-filled ammo racks. This created a severe intelligence gap. Germany fought against a stronger enemy than anticipated, while the Americans maximized their armored strength without changing fundamental tactics. In late 1944 and early 1945, as the M4A3E2 Jumbo, a heavy Sherman variant, entered combat, Wet-Stowage became standard. Jumbo tanks featured up to 4-inch front armor and 6-inch turret armor combined with fireproof ammunition storage, allowing crews to survive direct hits from German 75 mm and 88mm guns. Jumbo Shermans led attacks on fortified positions that older Shermans could not safely approach. The overall impact of Wet-Stowage is reflected in post-war statistics. The U.S. Campaign Research Office, ORO T-117, reported that before the upgrade, a Sherman battalion taking 30 armor-piercing hits could lose 18 to 24 tanks due to ammo fires. With wet stowage, only 3 to 5 tanks were truly destroyed, with the rest repairable and reusable. Thus, the same number of tanks maintained much higher combat power, allowing the U.S. to sustain continuous campaigns, accelerate offensive momentum, and exert strategic pressure on German forces, even when Germany attempted major counterattacks, such as Operation Nordwind, January 1945. Their plans failed due to miscalculations of available Shermans. The Americans not only retained many tanks, but previously knocked-out tanks were repaired and returned to action. German panzer divisions suffered heavy losses, while U.S. forces maintained armored superiority and mobility, minimizing personnel casualties thanks to the fireproof system. Psychologically, wet stowage also had a profound effect on Sherman crews. Knowing the ammo was less likely to detonate, crews fought with greater confidence, maneuvered aggressively, and counterattacked. Higher survivability and rapid repair capability bolstered morale, in stark contrast to the constant fear of catching fire that had plagued earlier crews. By the end of the war, wet stowage had proven that a small but strategic technical improvement could alter global outcomes. It required no publicity, no superweapon, only effectiveness, ease of production, and discreet implementation. The Germans fought Shermans based on outdated data, unaware that the enemy had been fundamentally upgraded from within. As a result, most of their counterattack plans, force calculations, and tank tactics became ineffective. Overall, wet stowage allowed the U.S. to minimize total losses to fires and maximize repairable tanks, maintain continuous armored combat power from Normandy to the Rhine, reduce casualties, protecting thousands of crews, gain an invisible strategic advantage that Germany could not anticipate. This improvement also reflected the U.S. design philosophy during the war, focus on practical, rapid solutions that protect soldiers rather than chasing complex or long-term perfect weapons. Wet stowage was not a world-changing invention, but it altered the European battlefield and the ultimate outcome of World War II. By May 1945, wet stowage Sherman units had proven their effectiveness across thousands of engagements, from Normandy, Morton, and Arracourt to the Ardennes and the final advance into Germany. Even when Germans captured intact Shermans, they did not recognize the upgrade's significance. Wet stowage thus not only saved lives but acted as a secret, invisible weapon, delivering victory through the Americans' carefully designed, silent innovation. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the Allied forces began summarizing the key lessons from the brutal months of combat. Among the inventions and technical improvements, the wet stowage system on Sherman tanks stood out, not for showcasing brute power or fundamentally changing battlefield design, but for quietly transforming how armored warfare was perceived. In many ways, wet stowage exemplifies the intersection of engineering, design philosophy, and military strategy. First, wet stowage is a story of simple yet effective technical innovation. In 1942-1943, the Sherman earned the nickname Ronson due to its high susceptibility to fires when hit by armor-piercing rounds. The primary cause was the loose arrangement of propellant charges inside the fighting compartment, which ignited easily when struck by hot metal fragments. Early radical solutions, such as redesigning the entire armor or combat compartment, were impractical. Mass production would slow, creating shortages on multiple fronts. Wet stowage emerged as a practical solution, protecting ammunition in the compartment with fire-retardant liquid while preserving mobility in combat. Capability without interrupting the production line. What made wet stowage remarkable was the subtlety in design and materials. Initially, water was used, then ethylene glycol was added to prevent freezing, and ultimately Amodamp, a solution of ethyl sodium potassium phosphate with rust inhibitors and antibacterial additives, was developed. This formula prevented freezing, rust, and bacterial growth while enhancing fire suppression. With this seemingly small change, the M4A176W and subsequent variants reduced their burn rate from 60 to 80% down to just 10 to 15%. Crew survival rates increased significantly, fundamentally altering the continuous combat capability of American armored forces. Strategically and tactically, Wet-Stowage created an invisible advantage that the Germans could not perceive. German tank crews continued using old tactics, aiming for the side ammo racks to destroy Shermans. But many damaged vehicles could still rotate turrets, retreat, or be quickly repaired. As a result, U.S. divisions maintained sustained armored strength, kept up the pace of attacks, and rendered German force calculations ineffective. Battles such as Mortain, Arracourt, and the Ardennes clearly demonstrated this. Germany overestimated Sherman vulnerability and destruction rates, leading to failed decisive counterattacks. Wet-Stowage also highlighted the psychological and tactical impact of high survivability. Crews knew the ammo was less likely to explode, boosting confidence to maneuver and counterattack. This confidence not only minimized losses, but increased overall combat effectiveness. While older Shermans could ignite and panic crews, Wet-Stowage tanks enabled soldiers to maintain morale, perform difficult missions, and sustain offensive operations for days and weeks. Another important aspect was mass production and deployment. Wet-Stowage required no revolutionary design or tactical overhaul. It was a technical solution that could be integrated directly into assembly lines, with factories like Fisher Tank Arsenal and Pressed Steel Car Company modifying floors, turret rings, and wiring systems to accommodate the new ammo racks without disrupting production. From January 1944 onward, all Shermans rolling off production lines were equipped with Wet-Stowage, providing a continuous advantage across fronts from Normandy to Germany. Wet-Stowage also demonstrated the power of industrial capacity and engineering coordination in modern warfare. U.S. engineers combined chemistry, mechanics, and military engineering to create a practical, deployable, and effective solution. Even when Germans captured intact Shermans, they failed to recognize the upgrade's significance, as Wet-Stowage did not change external appearance, required no new tactics, and was not widely publicized. This created an invisible secret weapon, as effective as a more powerful gun or engine. The historical lesson of Wet-Stowage also relates to military intelligence and misperception. German forces based their tactics on Shermans captured before 1944, which included detailed descriptions of ammo racks and instructions on how to destroy them. When the new Shermans appeared, German crews continued using old tactics, misjudging enemy strength. This demonstrates that in modern warfare, outdated intelligence can be as dangerous as ineffective weapons, and continually updating information about the adversary is vital. Wet-Stowage also reflected American military design philosophy: quick, practical solutions that protect soldiers rather than pursuing technical perfection. While Germany devoted years to developing superweapons, the U.S. implemented a small but effective change, deployable immediately on the production line. As a result, Wet-Stowage Shermans not only saved thousands of tank crews, but increased the combat power of entire armored divisions, shortened campaign durations, and directly contributed to the war's outcome. Wet-Stowage also highlights the importance of technical details. A seemingly minor improvement, liquid-filled ammo racks, could transform tank survivability and combat effectiveness, influencing campaign outcomes and even the war itself. In all military domains, such quiet technical innovations can be as decisive as advanced weapons or complex strategic tactics. Moreover, Wet-Stowage demonstrated that victory relies not just on firepower or tank numbers, but on maintaining forces and maximizing combat efficiency. A Wet-Stowage Sherman battalion taking 30 armor-piercing hits might only lose 3 to 5 tanks, with the rest repairable and reusable. Continuous combat capability thus becomes a strategic weapon not to be underestimated. From a modern perspective, Wet-Stowage exemplifies rapid technical innovation in wartime. Sherman designers implemented an effective loop of problem identification, testing, improvement, mass deployment. They identified the main problem, flammable ammo racks, tested multiple solutions, water, glycol, ammudamp, verified effectiveness at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and deployed on a mass scale without interrupting production, a model for military engineering innovation under urgent conditions. Finally, Wet-Stowage illustrates the power of the invisible. It did not alter the tank's appearance, require new tactics, or demand special crew skills, yet it multiplied the Sherman's combat effectiveness. History has many well-known technical innovations, but Wet-Stowage shows that quiet, unnoticed solutions can sometimes determine the outcome of war.